Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed, Daf 30 of Masechta Beitzah. Friends, today we are starting the fourth parak, 4 out of 5. We are about 3/4 of the way into Masechta Beitzah. We're learning Daf Lamed. Of course, there are 40 Daf in Masechta Beitzah. We're starting the fourth parak, the parak of Hamevi. Sounds like it's going to be pretty fun. Today we are going to discuss kind of like muksa kind of things, which is interesting. And also Sukkot comes up, a shtickle, which is kind of cool. So friends, let us jump in. Says the Mishnah at the bottom of Daf Choftes Amud Beis Hamevi Kadeyayin Mimakum Lemakum. If a fellow on Yom Tif wants to transport wine from one place to another, Lo Yiviyam Besal Uvkupa, don't like take a whole bunch of bottles and put them into a basket or like some kind of a box. Maybe but you could schlep it on your shoulder. Oh, the fun of it, I guess just like hold it. Or if a fellow's moving straw, don't like sling a box or something over your shoulder. But you can just kind of carry it normally. Okay, because we don't want it to look like sort of a weekday activity where you would kind of like, take like a case or something of wine. Like, no, you want to just do it kind of like one at a time kind of thing. And you would be allowed to like, take like some straw. We wouldn't say that it's considered muksa. Avalo be'etzim sheba muksa. However, you would not be allowed to use like wood from like your backyard. Okay. Fine. So, Kayla, we're saying that even though you didn't necessarily prepare this straw in advance, you would still be allowed to use it. And then we're saying that you're not allowed to use the wood from the backyard. And the backyard is where they would kind of like store. It looks like there are people here. Wonder who they are. The backyard would be like where they would like store like things that they would just like store for a while that they can kind of forget about. And therefore it would be muksa. Therefore you wouldn't be allowed to use it. Now the Gemara is going to ask, like, I don't get it. We just said on the one hand you can use this straw that we didn't set aside, and on the other hand we're saying that the stuff in the muksa is muksa. So do we hold of muksa or don't we hold of muksa? So we're gonna have to figure that out. Okay, it says the Gemara Tana imiyevshel l'shanos mutter. Okay, so we had said that when you carry this wine, you shouldn't do it like in the normal way that you carry the wine during the week and like a case of it. Rather, you should just like, if you can do something different than the normal way, so that would be better. Asking Rava b'machoza, so machoza. So yesterday we were talking about all the different places where the different Amoraim lived. So here's another place, machoza, that Rava that's where Rava was, in machoza. The daru beduchka lidru berigla. So if normally you would have to exert a lot of energy in order to schlep something, so maybe try using a pitchfork. I guess that would make it easier. I don't know. I'm not very experienced with the pitchfork. Alright. I don't even know if I have a pitchfork. You guys have pitchforks? I don't know. If you normally use pitchforks, so then maybe try using a pole that would require 2 people to put it on their shoulders. Alright? And if normally it's something that you would use with a pole that would require 2 people to put it on their shoulders, then so try using a handheld pole, not a shoulder mounted pole. And if normally you would use a handheld pole, so maybe try putting some kind of cloth over, I guess, what you're carrying, I guess. And if there's mamish no way for you to like do it differently, well then, shari, just carry it normally to Amar Maya, as we said, mutter. Like, if you can't do it differently, then just do it. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Well, that was fun. Let's see what we got up next. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava Ravashi. So Rav Chanan bar Rava says to Ravashi, Amar Abonon, Kamad Efshel L'Shanuyim Mishaninan. On the one hand, the rabbi said that you should try to do things differently as much as possible, and yet biyom hatava on Yom Tiv, v'hane nashi. Oh, this guy better be careful. The kamayin chatzbayu maya biyom hatava. These women that are filling up their pitchers, mamish, the women are schlepping the water from wherever the water is, and the men are just criticizing. I don't understand, says Rav Chanan bar Rava to Rav Ashi. He says, I don't get it. The rabbis, we make the rules. We said that you have to do things differently. And these women, they're schlepping water from the river for their husbands to be able to drink water and for the family. And they don't do any kind of shinoi. What chutzpah? These women, they're filling up their jugs with water on Yom Tov. They're not making any kind of shinoi. And we don't tell them anything. Have you ever heard of such a crazy thing? We have to yell at them. We have to make a mecha, make a stance. Very interesting. So Rav Ashi's response is, well, what should they do? They can't actually do anything any differently. Now, I feel like the last time we had this, it sounded to me like a hack, right? What do you mean it's impossible? There's always a way to do something differently. But although, but Rav Ashi is pointing out here that it would be the example of example of like a chomer that leads to a kula kind of thing. Meaning, you pull on one end and then something else happens on the other end. Let's see, what does this mean? So kilu demali b'chatz b'rabba timali b'chatz b'zuta. What should we suggest? That if they're using big jugs, then they should switch to using smaller jugs, and that would be a shinoi. But then we're going to be forcing them to make more trips, and if they make more trips, that's more effort. That's not something that we want to be doing. Causing a situation where they have to expend more effort on Yom Tov. And if they use smaller jugs, for us to suggest that they use larger ones, well then mafshid b'masud. Now they have to schlep more in one go, which we don't want to do on Yom Tov. And if we say, well, why don't you maybe try closing the jugs with some kind of a lid, and that would be like a shinoi. Well, what if the lid falls off and then they end up carrying it? We don't want that. And maybe if they tie the lid on or something, well, what if the tie becomes untied and then they're going to retie it, which is also something that we don't want them to be doing because it's a malacha. So tifra sudra ilavin, if we say, why don't you put some kind of cloth on it, zimnin de matmish b'maya v'asil de schita. What if the cloth gets wet in the water and then they end up squeezing it out, which is schita, and that's also something we don't want them to be doing. Hilkach le'efshir, says Rav Ashi, look, leave them alone. Any kind of shinoi that you're going to try to impose upon them is just going to have some other side effect that we don't want anyways. Just leave them alone. And I guess at the end of the day, we said what? If it's too difficult to make a shinoi, so then just don't worry about it. Says Rav bar Rav Chanan to Abai. Tnan. We learn in a Mishnah. Ein mitapchin, vein mesapkin, vein muraktin. We don't clap. We don't slap our thighs. We don't slap our thighs. All right. Vein muraktin, and we don't dance on Yom Tov. Va'idin de kochazin de avdan. Hachiv lo amin and lo midi. Says Rav bar Rav Chanan to. Interesting. The first one was Rav Chanan bar Rava. This is Rav bar Rav Chanan. Interesting. So he says to Abai, he says, look, I don't understand. The Mishnah says that we don't clap, we don't hit our thighs, we don't dance on Yom Tov, and yet everyone does it. Everyone claps, hits their thighs, and dances. So what's the deal? Nobody said, we don't say anything to them. Why not? We should take a stance. We should say, don't clap, don't hit your thighs, don't dance. To which Abai responds, he says, and according to you, that Rabba says, a fellow shouldn't sit right at the entrance to the lechi. Friends, you remember what a lechi is? Back from Eruvin, at the entrance to the mavoi, there would be like a vertical pole, which was a lechi. A fellow shouldn't sit next to the lechi. Because what if some kind of an item passes by in Rishus HaRabim, and you might take it and bring it into the mavui, which is a Rishus HaYachid, and then of course you'll be taking something from one Rishus to another, and we don't want you to do that. So therefore, Rabbah said that you shouldn't sit by the opening to the mavui, by the lechi. But what about these women who go and sit with their pitchers right by the entrance of the mavui? We don't say anything about that. Ella, rather, says Abai, Hanachloim l'Yisrael, leave the Yidden alone. Mutav shiyu shogin vayu mazidin. Better that they should do something by mistake than to do it intentionally. Because meaning when it comes to something that this is what everybody's doing, and they're going, it's human nature, they're going to continue doing it anyways. So better to not call them out on it. Better to just be like, to let it be, rather than to put people in a situation where now they know that they shouldn't be doing it and they're going to be doing it anyways. We don't want to essentially set them up for failure. And that's why we don't say anything. We don't say anything to these women who sit by the lechi and the mavui. And also, achanami, here also by the clapping and the hitting your thighs and the dancing, hanachloim l'Yisrael, leave the Yidden alone. Mutav shiu shogin v'ayu mazidin. Better that they should do it by accident rather than to know that they should not be clapping and stuff and do it anyways. We don't want to set them up for failure. And now the Gemara wants to argue that now this is specifically by dinim d'Rabbanan. We don't say this sort of live and let live thing by the oraisas. By the Rabbanans we could say, look, if they're not going to do it anyways, don't set them up for failure. But if it's a deoraisa, we're not going to say that. We're going to have to protest. But the fact of the matter is, says the Gemara, that's actually not true. It actually doesn't matter if it's a deoraisa or a derabbanan. We don't say anything to them to Tosfos Yom Kippurim, because when it comes to adding on to Yom Kippur, that we should fast even before Yom Kippur started, as we learned in Masechta Yoma, deoraisa. That's midoraisa, as the pasuk says, right? B'tisha b'chodesh me'erev ad erev. Right? Well, wasn't that what it was? V'nisim es nashusechem b'tisha lachodesh. I think that's what it was. What do you mean that you're supposed to fast on the 9th day? I thought Yom Kippur is on the 10th day. So it means that you start already before Yom Kippur starts. And yet there are people who continue to eat and drink until it gets dark, and we don't say anything to them because of this concept of hanachloim liYisrael mutav shiu shogin v'ayu mazidin. Better that they should do something by accident rather than to set them up for failure. Interesting. Said the Mishnah, so the Mishnah had said that you're allowed to take this straw on Yom Tov even if you didn't set it aside in advance. So what does that sound like? It sounds like that there's no muksa. And then it says, avalo beitzim shebamuksa, but you're not allowed to use the wood that was in your backyard that, sort of you had no intention of using. Why? Because it's muksa. So one second. First we're saying we don't hold the muksa, and then we're saying that we do hold the muksa. The door just slammed. Okay. Omer of Kahana says of Kahana, Zosomeres maschilim ba'otzer trila. So what does it mean? It means, so if we're saying that you're allowed to use the straw, it means that you're allowed to go into like your storage space and take something that you weren't necessarily planning to be taking, and you could take it anyways. Mani Reb Shimon, muksa. That sounds like Reb Shimon, who doesn't hold of muksa. But Ema Seifa, if we then say the next part of the Mishnah, avalo be'etzim shebamuksa, you're not allowed to use the wood that's in this backyard area because you set aside that wood, and you don't have any intention of using it anytime soon. So therefore it's muksa. So the Rabbi Yehuda, that Disley muksa. That sounds like Rabbi Yehuda, who of course we know holds of muksa. So what's the deal? Is it Reb Shimon, like it sounds like from the Reish, or is it Rabbi Yehuda, like it sounds like from the Sefer? Period. Mode. So the Gemara answers, it is in fact Reb Shimon. It is in fact Reb Shimon who doesn't hold of muksa, and that's why you're allowed to use this straw even though you didn't set it aside. Well, what's the deal with the wood in the backyard that we say that Reb Shimon seems to be saying that you're not allowed to use anyway, that you're not allowed to use, which sounds like, but I thought he doesn't hold of muksa. Well, that's talking about these types of cedar wood that are very expensive, and you use them for construction, for building, and because they're expensive, it's muksa mach meschesrin kis. And you don't have any use for them. You have zero intention of using them on Yom Tov, because you're obviously not like doing construction on Yom Tov, and therefore even Reb Shimon would say that the wood that's in the backyard is muksa, and that's why you're not allowed to take it. There are those who teach Rav Kahana's question on the second part of this Mishnah, which is avalo be'etzim shebamuksa, that you're not allowed to use the wood that's in the backyard. So that sounds like okay, you wouldn't be allowed to take something from a storage house on Yom Tov because it's muktzah, money Rabbi Yehuda. So that sounds like right now we're in Rabbi Yehuda's camp, the Islay muktzah, that he holds of muktzah. But then what about the fact that the first part, though, the part of the Mishnah right before that says that you are allowed to take this straw that you didn't set aside in advance? That sounds like Reb Shimon, right? You didn't set it aside and still you're allowed to use it, who doesn't hold a muktzah. So what's the deal? On the one hand, the second part sounds like Reb Yehuda, the first part sounds like Reb Shimon. Hasum betivnasaria zeu. So the Gemara answers no. It's actually all Reb Yehuda. That it's all Reb Yehuda, and there is muksa. So what's the deal with the first part that says that you are allowed to use this straw? That's talking about straw that's completely rotten, and there's only one thing that you can do with rotten straw, and that is burn it. And therefore, you already had intention from before Yom Tif that you can be burning this straw on Yom Tif, and therefore Reb Yehuda would say it's not muksa. But tivnesaria achazi latina. But one second, you can use rotten straw to make cement. There is beikotzim. No, it's talking about rotten straw that has thorns in it, and you wouldn't use rotten straw that has thorns in it to make cement, and therefore it's rotten straw that the only thing you can do with it is burn it, and therefore even Rabbi Yehuda would say that it's not muktzah. But according to the second reading, this Mishnah is Taka Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, sounds like fun. Friends, we're moving on to Daf Lamed Amud Beis. At the top of the Amud says the Mishnah, Ein notlin eitzim min asukah ela min asamuchla. Interesting. You're not allowed to take wood from a hut. So it's not necessarily talking about sukkahs. It's talking about, it could be Shavuos or Pesach, but you're outside in a hut for shade, whatever it is. So you're not allowed to take wood from the sukkah, but you're allowed to take from what's near it. And the assumption for now is what that means is that you wouldn't be allowed to take the wood from directly from the roof. But if the roof was very thick and there was a few layers of wood, so you'd be allowed to take min hasamuchla, you'd be allowed to take some wood from the top layers of the wood. Alright. Says the Gemara, Ma'ishna min asukah dilo. So the Gemara says, one second, I don't understand. How come you're not allowed to take the wood from the lower layers of the roof of the hut? Because also ohala. Well, because if you remove some of the wood from the first layer of the roof of the hut, well, you're going to be destroying an ohel on Yom Tif, and you can't destroy an ohel on Yom Tif. But menasamuchla nami kosasar ohala. But I understand, even if you take it from the upper layers, you're still destroying a structure. Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, my samuch samuch lidfanus. So if Yehuda says the name of Shmuel, that what it means is not close to the roof, but close to the walls. I guess close to the walls isn't really as big of a deal. All right. Rav Menashe Amar afilu tema b'she'ein samuch lidfanus kitane ahi ba'asur yasa. Sorry, just one more point about the walls. Right, the point is that the walls is the walls are woven, and this part that you're taking is not woven together with the rest of the wall, so therefore it's considered completely separate, and therefore you're allowed to take it. But from the roof, since the roof isn't woven, it's just kind of everything is stacked, so it's just all one mass, so therefore you wouldn't be able to take from it. But now says Rav Menashe that you can even say that it's b'she'ein. Where am I? Amar afilu tema b'she'ein samuch lidfanus kitanya ahi ba'asur yasam. Says Rav Menashe that you can even say that it's talking about the roof, but that it is talking about bundles, right? So ki'ilu, if you had a bunch of bundles of wood or something on top of the roof that you didn't undo the bundles to make them part of the rest of the roof, so it means that you kept them separate, and therefore they're not actually part of the structure, and it's not going to be you're destroying the structure when you chop this wood. Alright, sounds very nice. Okay, says the Gemara, Tani Reb Chia bar Yosef kamed Reb Yochanan. The Reb Chia bar Yosef taught before Reb Yochanan in Notlim Eitzim min asukeh ela min asamuchla. You're not allowed to take wood from the sukkah, only from that which is close to it. Alright. Reb Shimon Matir, Reb Shimon says you can even take that which is close to it. Okay. We're going to have to figure out why. V'shavim b'sukkah sachag, everyone agrees that when it comes to Sukkos, the festival of Sukkos, b'sukkah sachag b'chag, that on Sukkos, for the duration of the entire Sukkos, shasur, that you wouldn't be allowed to take any parts of the wood. But if you made a condition, so then it's all based on what the condition is, and the Gemara is going to have to explain what that means. Reb Shimon Matir, so the Gemara says, I don't understand. One second. How could it be that Reb Shimon allows you, right? We just said a minute ago that you're only allowed to take wood from that which is close to the hut, but not from the actual roof of the hut. But Reb Shimon says it's okay. How could he just say it's okay? This isn't just a muksa thing. This is you're actually destroying the roof, the structure. That's not allowed. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Hacha b'sukkah ofeles oskinon. Here we're talking about a sukkah that fell down. And Reb Shimon, so it's not a matter of destroying a hut. The hut already fell down. Reb Shimon the time made the Amr delays le muktzah, that Reb Shimon doesn't hold of muktzah. And because Reb Shimon doesn't hold of muktzah, he says you can just use the wood that was from the roof. All right. The Tanya is learning in a Beitzah. Moser Hashem and Shebener v'Shebekayra. Right? How do we know that Reb Shimon doesn't hold of muktzah? Because if you have leftover oil in a candle or like a plate, if you filled up like a bowl or something with oil and put some wicks in, also you're not allowed to use the leftover oil. Reb Shimon matir, whereas Reb Shimon says that you would be allowed to use the leftover oil. So we see that he doesn't hold of muktzah, and therefore you can use the wood from the ceiling. But midami, is the oil and the ceiling of the hut similar? When it comes to a lamp, when it comes to a candle, so you kind of know that eventually the candle is going to go out, and when it does, you'll be able to take the oil. But what a person's not waiting around for his sukkah, for his hut to fall down, and then he'll be able to take the wood from the ceiling. It's not expected that the sukkah is going to fall down. And therefore, when the sukkah unexpectedly falls down, I would think that Reb Shimon would say, even in that case, it would be muktzah, because you had absolutely no expectation of being able to use that wood. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Hacha b'sukkah ra'ua askinon, says Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, here it's talking about a shaky sukkah that ended up falling down. That you could say that according to Reb Shimon, even though during Bein Hashmashos, when Yom Tov started, the sukkah was still standing, but he kind of had intention already from before Yom Tov that if it falls down, he'll be able to chop the wood, and therefore Reb Shimon says that you'd be allowed to use that wood. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. When Reb Shimon says you're allowed to use the wood even from the ceiling, it means a shaky sukkah that already you had a bad feeling about it from before Yom Tov. All right. V'shavin b'sukkos achag b'chag sheyasura. But both Reb Shimon and the Tanna Kama agree that when it comes to the sukkah of sukkos, that you would not be allowed to use the wood from the ceiling. Okay? Or any part of it. But if you make a stipulation, so then it's all based on what you stipulated. Tonight, to which the Gemara says, 1 second. On Sukkot, can you just make a stipulation about? Can you just make a stipulation, and then you can use the wood from the schach and things like that? You can't do that. V'amar Rav Sheishis mishum Rabbi Akiva. Rav Sheishis has the name of Rabbi Akiva. Minayin, or from Rabbi Akiva. Minayin la'atzei sukkah she'asurin kol shiva. How do we know that the wood for the sukkah is usur? It's off limits for all 7 days. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Chag HaSukkos shivas yom la'Hashem, that the festival of Sukkot is 7 days for God. V'tanya, and we learn in the Beitzah, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, minayin shekshem shechol shem shamayim al chagiga. How do we know that just like the God's name goes upon the korban chagiga, kachol shem shamayim al sukkah, also God's name goes upon the sukkah. Talmud Omer, as the pasuk says, Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yom LaHashem, that Chag HaSukkos, Chag referring to the Chagiga, Sukkos referring to your Sukkah, Shivas Yom is for all 7 days, LaHashem to God. Machag LaHashem, just like the Chagiga, the Korban Chagiga, the Shaman Chagiga is for God, Av Sukkah LaHashem, also Sukkah is for Hashem. So we see that for all 7 days, the Sukkah is God's, and you cannot use the wood of the Sukkah. It's off limits for all 7 days. Amar Menashe B'Derava, Seifa Ason L'Sukkah Da'ama. So 1 second. So what did we just say? So we just said that basically the wood of the sukkah is off limits for all 7 days. So how can we say that if you make a tanai, if you make a stipulation, a condition about the wood of the sukkah in advance, well then you'll be able to use the wood of the sukkah? What do you mean? It's off limits. It's God's. It's for all 7 days. You can't use it. So Amar Menashe B'Derava says, Menashe B'Derava Seifa Ason L'Sukkah Da'ama, that when the Beitzah says that if you make a stipulation, well then it's whatever your stipulation is, that's by a sukkah da'alma. That is no longer talking about sukkahs. Meaning, the way to read the Beitzah is that, like this. That on a regular Yom Tov, you're not allowed to take wood from the sukkah, only from that which is nearby. Reb Shimon says that you're allowed to use any of the wood from this hut from like Shavuos or Pesach. V'shavim b'sukkos hachag, but everyone agrees that on Sukkos she'asur, that you wouldn't be able to take any of the wood. Now, going back to the first part, like a regular Yom Tif hut, if in advance you had made up that you're going to be taking some of the wood, well then it's all based on whatever you had stipulated in advance. Aval sukkah de mitzvah lo mahani batana'a, but a regular sukkah, a sukkah from the festival of Sukkot, you wouldn't be able to make a condition because it's off limits for all 7 days. But just on like a regular sukkah from like the other festivals, if as we said, it's talking about a shaky sukkah that kind of like already from before Yom Tif, you kind of knew that it was like shaky and that it might fall down. So then, if already you stipulated before Yom Tif that like, hey, if it falls down, I'm going to chop around from the wood. So then, whatever you stipulated is what we're going to work with. V'sukkah de mitzvah lo. Now, in fact, the Gemara, 1 second. I can't make any kind of stipulation that I want when it comes to sukkahs, my sukkah on sukkahs. But we learn in a Beitzah, sikicha kilchasa, that if you made proper schach for your sukkah, vitcher bekramim v'stinin, and then you decorated it with different tapestries, hamitzuyarin, that were colored, v'tala ba'egozim shkedim afarsikim v'rimonim, and you hung up nuts and almonds and peaches and pomegranates, and clusters of grapes, shmanim, slatos, wines, oils, flowers, shibolim, and wheat, and all these beautiful sounding decorations. So you're not allowed to use, you're not allowed to, get any benefit from any of these, you're not allowed to take any of these decorations. They're off limits for all of Sukkot. They're off limits until after Sukkot. But says this Beitzah that if you made a stipulation that where he says that during Ben Hashmashos of Erev Sukkot, he's not giving them up; they're still his, which means that when Sukkot starts, these decorations still belong to him. Now we're not talking about the Sukkah itself, but we're talking about these decorations. So then it's all based on his stipulation. So if that's the case, so then it sounds like even by Sukkot you'd be able to make a stipulation. So Abaye v'Rava damar tarvayu b'mei eni bodo mehem kol ben hashmashos. So it says Abaye and Rava that this is specifically when he says that during Ben Hashmashos, that when Yom Tif comes in on the first day of Yom Tif, he says what? I'm not separating myself from them. I'm maintaining my sort of access to these decorations during all of the Bein Hashmashos of the Erev, the first day of Sukkot. To l'chol kedusha alayu, that the kedusha of the sukkah does not then descend upon, apply to these decorations that you are retaining the rights to. Aval atzi sukkah d'chol kedusha alayu, but the sukkah itself that the kedusha, memele goes upon during Bein Hashmashos, well, that's going to be off limits for the entire Sukkot. Iskatzar l'shiva is going to be off limits for all 7. The decorations, though, you can make a stipulation and be able to use them during Sukkot if you made that stipulation. We say 1 second. Why is this different? Why do we say that the Sukkah is off limits for all 7 days, but yet this is a Beitzah that we had learned, or a Gemara that we had learned in Masechta Sukkah. For Shiva Esrogim l'Shiva Yomim, if a fellow set aside 7 esrigs for all 7 days of Sukkot, Amarav says Rav Kol Achas V'Achas Yotzeba V'Ochla La'alter, that if you set aside 7 esrogim, so then after you use each one, right, each day you'll use a new esrog, and after you use it, you can eat it. Ravasi Amar Kol Achas Yotzeba V'Ochla L'Macher. Ravasi is slightly different. He says, look, after you use each one, you can eat it the next day. So not that day, but the next day. But the point being that they're not, why don't we say the same thing, that they're set aside for all 7 days? So asum de mafsku leilus miyomim kochad v'chad yoma mitzvah ba'pinafsha hu hacha d'lo mafsku leilus miyomim kula yoma kechada kula yoma yome kechada yoma richta dami. Maybe let's read that again. The nafkamina is that Hosam, over there, when it comes to the Esrogim, Timafsku Lelus Miyamim, right, as we learned to Masechta Sukkah, the mitzvah of Lulav is during the day, it's not at night, which means that there is a separation between each daily mitzvah of the Daled Minim. There's a night in between when it's not the mitzvah of, there's no mitzvah of Daled Minim at night. So because they're broken up by the nights, so kol chad v'chad yoma mitzvah ba'apei nafshehu. So therefore each day is its own mitzvah, and therefore when I'm yotze the mitzvah that day with my esrog, I can then eat it. Hacha, when it comes to sukkah, that the mitzvah of sukkah is day and night. There's no stopping at any point. So kulu yome kechad yom arichta dami. It's all one long day, meaning that once the kedusha applies to the sukkah at the beginning of sukkahs, it remains for the entire sukkahs. Very, very nice. All right, friends. Well, that was Daf Lamed of Masechta Beitzah. We started today the fourth parak of Masechta Beitzah. We discussed how when you transport wine and things like that, don't like take a big case of wine and transport it in the regular way that you would do during the week, but rather take like one bottle at a time. And we discussed that on Yom Tif, when you schlep things, you should try as much as possible to do it in a different kind of a way than you would normally do during the week. We saw some interesting halachis. For example, that Reb Shimon, who does not hold of muksa, he does say that when it comes to muksa machmas chesron kis, something that's muksa because it's very expensive, and you have no reason to use it on Shabbos, you have no intention of using it on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. So even Reb Shimon would say that it's muksa. And the Reb Yehuda, who does hold of muksa, so then he would say that if you had something like a straw that was rotten, that the only thing you can do with it is burn it on Yom Tov. So even that, he would say would not be considered muktzah. And then we discussed, being able to take wood from like a hut on Yom Tif, and we said that basically if it's going to be destroying the hut, so that wouldn't be allowed. But if it's a matter of muktzah, so then Reb Shimon would say it's okay. Tanakama, Mistam holds like Rabbi Yehuda, would say it's not okay. Okay, fine. But if you make we said that it's talking about like a shaky sukkah, that already from yesterday you had a feeling it could fall down. Well, then if you made a stipulation, so everyone would agree it's just based on whatever the stipulation is. But if it's on sukkahs, so the sukkah itself is off limits, kilu, all 7 days. But when it comes to the decorations of the sukkah, you could theoretically retain ownership of it during Bein Hashmashos when Yom Tov starts, and then you'll be able to get benefit from the decorations during sukkahs. Friends, that was Daf Lamed of Masechta Beitzah. I hope you enjoyed. Peace.